here for me to tell you a little bit about the state of our party. I'm proud to say that the state of our party is quite strong. 4 years ago, I set in what was considered really to be an unrealistic goal of $100,000 in the bank for the election. That was about 60% more than we'd ever raised before. Well, I'm glad to say that I am proud to say that we've now reached a little over $90,000. If you buy enough stuff in the silent auction, you can buy some more raffle tickets. Senator Lee, we're here tonight on the edge of history. If we went to the two House of Delegate seats, Republicans of Baltimore County will actually control the Baltimore County legislature. If we win 2 more state Senate seats, we'll control the Baltimore County delegation Senate. And if we win even 1 more county council seat, we will control for the first time ever the Baltimore County Council. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this is also the first time that we're having an elected Board of Education. We're going to do our best to make sure that we have a conservative student and parent-based school system and change it from what we've had, which is prisoner number 738421. I also want to do I'm going to do a lot of thank yous tonight, so I hope you're all uncomfortable. But because of State Party Chair, National Committeeman Dave Blasio, unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, nor could Nicola Ambrose, but she's well represented by her Simon and daughter. We are going to have the first RMC-supported office in Maryland history. So we're doing something right. Part of what we're doing right is we've got great, strong clubs. We've got the Reagan Republican Club, Club Conservative, Republican Women's Club in Baltimore, the Republican Club, the Northern Baltimore Republican Civic Association, the Young Republicans, the Northwest Republican Club, East County Republican Club, and the Pasco Valley Republican Club. Now, when you talk about counties, we have counties, Baltimore County is larger than, I believe, 5 states as far as population goes. So we're quite proud of what we've accomplished. We wouldn't be able to do it without a lot of good people. I want to thank the sponsors, starting with Al Redmond, who had to leave early to take care of his wife, Congressman Andy Harris, delegates and state senate candidates Chris West, Dr. Jack Gordon, freshly back from China. And we have our bronze sponsors, Delegate Joe Cluster, Delegate Kathy Schleifer, Senate Candidate Judy Campbell, Nino Minchioni, candidate in District 42B, Kathy Howley, running for school board in District, total fingers, 3. I'm always so happy when people will tell me that it's 3 fingers. It's the people who are giving me 1 finger that I'm Chris Cheaton, Mark Young, former Chairman John Piastro, Deb Sullivan, who is running for county council in District 6, and a special bronze sponsor to Dwight Patel, who sponsors the VIPs. So skipping right on to 6 pages of VIPs and delegates and distinguished guests. And you can just hold your applause to the end, or if you like, you can keep applauding through it. Rick Metzger, Brian Noon is running for sheriff. Rick had done our invocation earlier. He's a delegate from District 6. Brian Noon is our candidate for sheriff. Jane Roger for Register of Wills. Eric Lofstead is a candidate in District 6 also for County Council. For Senate candidate for the U.S. Senate, we've got Tony Campbell. Bill Friedrich. We've got county council candidate and longtime county councilman David Marks in District 5. Delegate candidate 42B, Chris Robinson, who has done a great job filling up this. What did I say? Tim, absolutely, everybody loves Tim being here. Well, I want to know who wrote down Tim, and just to really throw in. Chris West is here, as I mentioned, our silver sponsors, delegate and candidate in 42 for state senate. Delegate John Cluster, District 8. Former GOP chairman Diana Waterman. Delegate candidate District 12, Mike Russell. Delegate District 20, Bill Dodson. Current delegate and state senator, the Senate candidate Christian Mealy. Delegate District 7, Bill Paulshot. Good news, that's page 1 down. How about if I just give you the names? Would that be acceptable? I had a hunch it would be. Jay Payne, Craig Wolf, who by the way is going to be wonderful. Jim Crawford, Nora Zakora, Kathy Shalaga, Joe Cluster, I mentioned now red number 4, former delegate Don Murphy, for whom we have much to thank, and the senator will tell you about that later. Former delegate Jim Forts, although I think you go by Secretary Jim Forts now. Julie Hinn for school board. Deb Sullivan, town council. Andy Harris, congressman. Michael Brown and Stephanie Boston, both running for the 10th legislative district. Page 3. This is the whole McGilly guys. Steve McIntyre, Robin Grammer, Wade Cash, Nina Mangione, Bob Long, Carrie Delaney, Michael Finifter. Oh, we have the judges who have to be announced cumulatively is Carrie Delaney, Michael Finifter, Ruth Jakbowski, and Dennis Robinson. William Bjorn, Lauren Arkin, Bill Frank, also Secretary Jonathan Porter, who's looking to represent us right here in the Senator Johnny Salling is here with us tonight. Ann Miller of the school board, Chris Chapin, Senator for Senate, Liz Mallory, Senator for Congress in District 2, Charles Anthony, candidate for Congress, District 3. Now, some people like to say that that Roger Hayden is the last county executive we've had. I prefer to think of it as the most recent county executive we've had. So we have great hope that we're going to be able to take that seat this year. I'm glad that Patrick O'Keefe, the executive director of our state party, is here tonight. I've already thanked Dirk Hare for being here, and Ed Hale, candidate for county councilman. You know, with a slate this long, you would just assume we were going to just win everything because there were that many votes in Baltimore. I have 2 awards to give out tonight. Unfortunately, Beverly Goldstein is not here with us today. Beverly served for this is a Lifetime Achievement Award, served on the Central Committee for 24 years, and she has the distinction of being one of Ronald Reagan's 2 electors in 1984. So I will be passing this off to her daughter for her to put on the mantle, and hopefully Beverly will be back with us soon. Every year we give out a Volunteer of the Year award, and I send out an email, and or a couple of pieces of email mail, and I kind of start a whisper. Who should we have for the Volunteer of the Year? I Unfortunately, it was made way too easy for me this year because I got 4 people with the same person to nominate. Catherine Gerard, could you come on up? Because she does everything. If you ask, hey, can you do this? The answer is always yes. She always finds the time, she always finds the energy, and I'm so glad to call her a friend. Thank you so much, Catherine, and congratulations. The actual introduction of Senator Lee is only going to take 11 pages. No, I'm kidding. I can do that too. By the way, I was looking for inspiration on his website, what to say. By the way, Andy Harris is going to be doing the actual introduction. But I saw that it begins with Utah first. Now, as a Marylander, I have to tell you, I was not afraid that it said Utah first, because some people seem to be offended when they say America first. I don't have that fear. And I hope you and your friends understand exactly what that means. That your responsibilities begin in your community, in your home, your state, and in your nation. Andy Harris, could you come on up? By the way, the microphone is standing number 1.
Great. Listen, it's good to be here. Of course, you know, my career started about 20 years ago in Baltimore County, and my first district was only Baltimore County. Then they gave me a little bit of Harford County. Then I went to run for Congress. They gave me 12 counties, which I still have. They swapped out Anne Arundel for Carroll County, but I still have that. Look, I want to congratulate the 2 award winners. Beverly was there for my very first race. God bless her. Catherine, congratulations. Baltimore County is the epicenter of what we need to do in 2018. We need to turn out a lot of votes to re-elect Larry Hogan. A lot of votes to re-elect Larry Hogan. And we need to capture 2 of the Senate seats that belong in our party, not the Democrat Party. With Chris West and with Christian Mealy, we need to turn those seats into Republican seats. So that we can get our governor, Larry Hogan, to draw the next map. I'm only 1 of 8 down there. That's ridiculous. I tell people, we got a Republican governor. I'm the only congressman out of 8. This is crazy. And this is our chance to do it. I do want to thank Diana Waterman for coming from Queen Anne's County here. Thank you very much. You didn't come here to hear me. Believe me, you didn't come here to hear me. You came here to hear Senator Lee. Senator Lee is just an icon in the Senate. He's someone who stands up for conservative Republican principles every single day in the Senate. And let me tell you, in Washington, that is not easy to do. Any of you who don't believe that, read today's Sun editorial that attempted to, let me say, it wasn't very pleasant today, let me tell you that. It's hard to do. It is hard to stand up for conservative principles against all the voices that want to shout down conservative principles. We have to have people like Senator Lee there. Senator Lee, I remind him every time I see him, he probably forgot. We were elected in 2010. We went in 2011, we both got sworn in, but we were sat right next to each other in Freedom. In fact, you brought your family to that Freedom Works orientation, didn't you, in Baltimore? Because they had it in Baltimore, we sat next to each other. It was an honor to know that I was sitting next to someone who I knew was going to be a star of the U.S. Senate. And Senator Lee has not disappointed. So, Senator Lee needs no introduction to any Republican in the United States. With no further ado, Mike Lee from Utah.
when she introduced us, she said, yes, I'm Mike Lee's wife, and then she said, yeah, we're from Utah, we're Mormons. He has only one wife, I'm the only one. I found that outside of Utah, starting out with a polygamy joke just never goes wrong. Al, thank you also for the invitation to speak here, for your introduction as well. Yes, Utah first, given that that's the state from which I hold an election. I will have you know, though, that long before there was a Utah, my fourth great-grandfather, a guy named John Lee, was born in Baltimore County, Maryland, in 1743. I'm not sure what the English equivalent would be of Ik ben een Baltimorean, but you get the idea. I'm thrilled to hear about some of the progress that you've made here in Maryland within your Republican Party. It shows that you've got great leadership. And the fact that you are winning races, the fact that you've got victories in sight is an encouraging thing. The fact that you have sent Andy Harris to us again and again since 2010 speaks volumes about the dedication of conservatives here in Maryland. Please, please, please send Andy back. We need this man. I'm still a little bit thrown off by the fact that I got a standing ovation walking in here. When I'm on the East Coast, especially when I see a standing ovation, I know that it's not for me. So it really is an honor to be here. As Republicans, it's important for us to gather at events like this. It's important to remember that notwithstanding the fact that there are differences that divide us at times, there's more that unites us. And we've got to stick together, just as there are. It's often been said that there are no atheists in foxholes. I'm sure there are some, but there are relatively few. We can't afford to be overly picky about those who we support at times, especially when we're dealing with people who recognize no boundary around what government is, what it should be. The problem with recognizing no boundary around government is that they stop to recognize where you begin and where you end and everyone else begins, and that's a big problem. I think about this a lot as I examine the world of politics and Republican politics. I'm reminded, first of all, of what happens to the word politics when we break it down into its Greek roots. It consists of two Greek roots. One is poly, which means many. Think of polygamy, didn't mean to bring that up again. My people haven't practiced that in about 130 years. It's a long story, I can explain it some other time. Poly, which means many, and ticks, which are blood-sucking parasites. Put them together, and that's what happens. There's a story I once heard told, first heard told by a guy named Emo Phillips, who described walking across the Golden Gate Bridge very late at night. And it was late enough that there was no traffic on the bridge. In fact, he was convinced he was the only person on the bridge, just enjoying the solitude of the evening. And he got about halfway across the bridge, when all of a sudden he realized he was not, in fact, alone. In fact, there was someone just a few feet away from him, standing on the outside of the guardrail, holding on as if he were contemplating taking the unfortunate ultimate step to end his life. So Emo thought to himself, I've got to stop and talk to this man, because I can't let him do this. So the very first thing that came to his mind was to ask him, whether he believed in God. That's the start, especially for someone thinking about making that bridge from here to eternity. He stopped and asked the man, do you believe in God? The man said, yes. Oh, me too. Are you a Christian? And the man said, yes. And Emo said, me too. What denomination? Well, I'm a Baptist. Emo said, me too. Are you a Northern Baptist or a Southern Baptist? He said, I'm a Northern Baptist. Me too. Are you a Northern Fundamentalist Baptist or a Northern Reformed Baptist? I'm a Northern Fundamentalist Baptist. Me too. Are you a Northern Fundamentalist Baptist Conference of 1857 or a Northern Fundamentalist Baptist Conference of 1812? The man said, I'm a Northern Fundamentalist Baptist Conference of 1857. And Emo said, die, you heretic, and pushed him off the bridge. As a Mormon, a heretic myself, I'm very sensitive to being called a heretic. Sensitive to this point, but this reminds me of the fact that as Republicans, as conservatives, we've got to be far more engaged in the practice of finding allies and converting converts than we are in casting off heretics. And I hope that can animate the spirit of what we do as a party. I want to thank also Don Murphy for distributing the Jell-O. Thank you, Don. And there's a story behind that. For reasons that I really don't understand, Utahns consume more Jell-O on a per capita basis than any other state in the union. I'm not really sure that's a distinction we want to have, but we have it nonetheless. And for that reason, it is Utah's official state snack. And shortly after I was first elected to office, back in 2010 when I took office, we decided we needed to have a weekly reception of some sort. And a lot of senators will have a coffee meeting. I'm not a coffee drinker, and so we ultimately settled on Jell-O. So every Wednesday at 3:30, we serve Jell-O. And you're all invited to stop by there anytime. It's lovely. You know, we call it Jell-O Wednesday. And when we first started Jell-O Wednesday, and Don can attest to this, I think he was one of the first attendees. There was a rumor circulating Capitol Hill that we were serving Jell-O shots every Wednesday. And attendance at Jell-O Wednesday shot right up as a result. Died down again when they discovered this was just plain ordinary Jell-O. There was nothing else to it. But good times. One of the things that brings us together this evening, what I think makes us Republicans, is the fact that we're conservative. That always begs the question, what exactly is it we're trying to conserve? Well, at heart, I think we're trying to conserve a societal mindset that recognizes the fundamental, essential dignity of the human soul. That's really what unites us in the end, because we're willing to recognize that there is a difference between the individual, the family, the neighborhood, the community, and the nation. All of these things play essential roles, but you've got to take each in context. And especially for us as Americans, when it comes to recognizing the fundamental distinction between a state or local government on the one hand and a national government on the other hand. This is part of our cultural and historic DNA. This is what makes us us. In fact, it's the whole reason why we had the revolution. The revolution was a lot more. It was about a whole lot more than just not wanting to have a king, not wanting a monarch. It was, I don't want to say a side thought, but it was much more about the fact that we had become subject to a large, distant national government. One that taxed us aggressively, excessively so. One that regulated us oppressively. One that recognized no limits around its legislative power. And by the way, it was so far from the people that it was slow to respond to their needs and their concerns. But these are the reasons why we no longer fly the Union Jack. These are the reasons why we don't sing God Save the Queen. These are the reasons why those of you who are lawyers don't wear wigs when you go into court. Although I've been trying to bring that tradition back, I think it'd be interesting. We as Americans identify with the fact that governments have to operate within their proper sphere, and that there is rich cultural and regional diversity within our country that has to be respected. There was even at the time of the founding. In fact, especially at the time of the founding. They recognized that the last thing we wanted to do after throwing off what was then the world's greatest superpower was to adopt yet another national government that would make all decisions nationally. And at the same time, we understood that the 13 original states could never function independently. They wouldn't have survived. We had to be able to come together for certain unique purposes, certain undeniably national purposes, if we were to survive. In this respect, we learned something from our founders, and I don't just mean those who attended the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Although those men were, I believe, raised up by Almighty God to that very purpose. They were unusually wise, gifted individuals who understood a lot of things about human nature. They, in turn, stood on the shoulders of giants. You see, there are a lot of people who have actually played a significant role in our nation's founding, but who have been neglected, forgotten, written out of history. I wrote a book by that title. It's maybe not as much of Bill Dunson's favorite as is our lost Constitution, but it's also really awesome. Written out of history, I tell the story of some people who don't fit within this traditional mold of who we think of as our founders. including people who were neither white nor male, nor landowners, nor slave owners, including people like Canasatego. I mentioned that my fourth great-grandfather, John Lee, was born in Baltimore County in 1743. The very next year after that, 1744, was the first time that one of our most important forgotten founders, an Iroquois Indian chief named Canasatego, he was from the Onondaga tribe. That was in 1744. That's when he met Benjamin Franklin at a conference in Albany, New York. And he had a significant interaction with Benjamin Franklin, in which he said, take an arrow. Imagine holding one arrow. Could you break it? He said, yes, of course. It's easy to break one arrow. And then Canasatego said, now take 5 or 6 or 7 arrows. Bind them up together. Could you break those? No, it's really difficult. This is a symbol of our union. This is a symbol of the concept that we sometimes refer to as e pluribus unum. But this was the principle, really, of federalism as it now exists in the Constitution. Now, I've been trying for 8 years to come up with a sexier word for federalism. A more pithy way of saying things. I've toyed with the idea of calling it governed locally, to each level of government its own. I've never been able to come up with one. If you can come up with one, please let me know. But this principle of federalism, the idea that you're going to have some decisions made on a local level and a state level, and other decisions made unambiguously national, was not one of the principles that we inherited from our British forefathers. There are a lot of aspects of our government that did come from the British. The idea of a bicameral legislature, the idea of legislative body at all. Now, many of these things were not foreign to our British predecessors, and in some ways were actually set in motion by them. Federalism was not one of them. In fact, to this day, British Parliament has plenary legislative authority over the whole of the country. It governs. There is no such thing as federalism. Federalism is a somewhat uniquely American, and I would add Native American concept. You see, because as Canasatego explained to Benjamin Franklin, the individual tribes, the members of the Iroquois Confederacy, all governed themselves locally when it came to local decisions, but they came together and behaved as one nation for purposes of providing for their national defense. And that worked. And by the time Canasatego met Benjamin Franklin in 1744, the Iroquois Confederacy had operated effectively as one country for hundreds of years. So we didn't invent this concept. The Native Americans of the Iroquois Confederacy did. We have learned from them. We have benefited from them. And in fact, we followed federalism, this principle that Canasatego taught to Benjamin Franklin, from the time it became part of our Constitution, when it was written in 1787 and ratified a couple of years later, really for the first 150 years of our republic. We followed it quite faithfully, and to the extent we followed it, because we followed it, it fostered the development of the greatest civilization the world has ever known. Over the last 80 years, we've drifted from it. And this, I believe, is one of the reasons we've forgotten about Canasatego. Like some of our other forgotten founders, we've forgotten about it because he doesn't fit within the mold of white male landowner, in many cases slave owner. But in other ways, for other reasons, we've forgotten about it because we've forgotten about the principle for which he stood, about the principle he taught to Benjamin Franklin, about the principle that became perhaps the single most important structural protection within the Constitution, which is federalism. You see, when we remember the founding era, we remember that the time the Constitution was being debated for ratification, James Madison described the powers of the states as compared to the powers of the federal government this way. He said, the powers of Congress are few and defined, and those reserved to the states are numerous and indefinite. You see, our founders were wise. They knew that some things, just as was the case with the Iroquois Confederacy, would have to be handled at the state and local level. Most of the powers that are appropriately federal are found in one part of the Constitution that frequently goes unread. Article 1, Section 8. If you've got time sometime, just please read the whole Constitution. If you don't have time to do that, just read Article 1. If you don't want to read all of Article 1, just read all of Article 1, Section 8. That won't take you very long. It reminds me of a law school professor I had who said that we're trying to distill the major components of every semester of every law school class when he was in law school down to a a lengthy acronym, and then he would reduce that to one letter, and then said it was all okay until I forgot what that letter is, and then forgot the entire subject. But the founders put into Article 1, Section 8 those powers that necessarily had to be vested in a national government. The list is relatively limited. It's not open-ended. It includes the power, of course, to provide for our national defense, to provide for armies, navies, national guards, and so forth. The power to regulate trade or commerce between the states with foreign nations. The power to coin money and regulate the value thereof, to come up with a uniform set of immigration, naturalization laws, bankruptcy laws, postal roads. Then there's my favorite power of Congress, which we don't invoke very much anymore, the power to grant letters of marque and reprisal. Anybody even know what those are? M-A-R-Q-U-E. You know what that is? Tell us. Yes! Yes! And effectively, you can be a pirate with the absolute protection of the United States government. I don't have any idea how long I will serve in the United States Senate, but regardless, one day I'm going to get a letter of marque and reprisal. And I'm going to be a pirate. And, complete with parrot and sword, skull and crossbones. You're all invited to join me. But my point is, that list really is few. Those powers described in that list are few and defined. And those reserved for the states really are numerous and indefinite. And what was implicit and actually quite clear in the text of the original Constitution was made doubly clear a couple years later with the addition of the 10th Amendment. It said, you know, all powers herein granted shall, all powers not granted to Congress and not prohibited by the Constitution to the states shall be reserved to the states respectively or to the people. I always love that last phrase, because when you're reserving power to the states, you're reserving it to the people. Just think for a minute about much more frequently, you tend to run into your state legislators than you do to, well, Andy is always everywhere, so I'm sure you see Andy at the grocery store. Other than Andy, you probably see your state legislators a lot more than you see your federal officials. And that's natural. Your typical federal lawmaker represents, what is it, 800,000 citizens at a time, and your typical state legislator, far fewer than that. In New Hampshire, I think it's one state legislator for every 3 people. But, most of the time, when you're reserving power to the states, you are in fact reserving power. Well, since the late 1930s, we have, brick by brick, built a wall up against federalism. We have turned this principle up on its head. What used to be federal powers can appropriately be described as few and defined, and state powers as numerous and definite. The opposite is true today. It took us a while to get there. But a lot of it started when Congress started expanding its power, spurred on by FDR, cajoled further by FDR's court packing plan. Congress passed and the Supreme Court ultimately blessed this theory that Congress's power to regulate trade between the states could actually be used to regulate anything and everything that, when measured in the aggregate, has a substantial effect on interstate commerce. This phrase, ladies and gentlemen, is why Americans hate lawyers. My late father was also a lawyer. He had this little sign in his office that said, "Yes, I'm a lawyer. Please don't tell my mother because she thinks I play the piano at a bordello." But as he also used to say, it really is a shame, it's unfair when you denigrate an entire profession on the basis of only 800,000 or 900,000 bad apples. But this language I used a minute ago, the idea that Congress can regulate any and every activity that, when measured in the aggregate, has a substantial effect on interstate commerce. That is a phrase that only a lawyer can love. Let me distill it down into plain English for you. It basically means if Congress can dream it, Congress can do it, Congress can regulate it, and nobody else gets to even whine about it, because the Supreme Court has said it will no longer enforce anything beyond that. And ever since then, ever since the Supreme Court adopted that line of reasoning in 1937, the Supreme Court has invalidated only 2 acts of Congress under the theory that they violate and exceed this principle of giving Congress the power to regulate commerce between the states. Arguably, there was a third time. Once was in 1995, once was in 2000. Those dealt respectively with provisions of the Gun-Free School Zones Act in 1995 and provisions of the Violence Against Women Act in 2000. The third time, arguably, was in 2012 when the Supreme Court decided the case called NFIB versus Sebelius. You'll know it as the Obamacare case. The Supreme Court said that in that case, Congress had exceeded its authority under the Commerce Clause by enacting the individual mandate, requiring every American to buy health insurance, not just any health insurance, but that health insurance which Congress, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that everybody had to buy. The Supreme Court concluded, after saying that that was outside of Congress's Commerce Clause power, it then went on to rewrite the law, not just once but twice, as it were a tax. It says it was a valid exercise of our power to tax. It wasn't, and that was wrong, but the idea is this. We have to restore the constitutional state of affairs, the constitutional mandate by which our states have most of the power. Even though Republicans are the only people advocating for this very much right now. Not all Republicans do. And in fact, we have seen over the last 80 years the mission creep of the federal government advance under houses of representatives, senates, and White Houses of every conceivable partisan combination. Republicans and Democrats have done this as once. But this is starting to shift. Because we as a people are starting to understand that it's not as though Congress has the Midas touch. I mean, look, our institutional approval rating hovers between 9 and 11%, which technically makes us slightly less popular than Raul Castro in America, and only slightly more popular than the influenza virus, which inexplicably is gaining ground on us. It's counterintuitive, therefore, that we should continue to put more and more power into the pipeline that ends in Washington, D.C. And at the end of the day, this is neither Republican nor Democrat, even though we're the only ones calling for it right now. It's not necessarily either liberal or conservative. This is simply just an American value. In fact, look, if you're from Vermont, I have it on good authority that most of the people in Vermont would much prefer a single-payer government-funded health care system. It is one of the reasons why I will never ever live in Vermont. But if the federal government weren't already occupying such a large footprint in this area, they could much more easily, much more quickly, much more effectively go to where they want. In other words, federalism gives more of the people access to more of the kind of government they want, and less of the kind of government they don't want. That's what we need in America today. And here's one more great thing about federalism. In my small town of Alpine, Utah, we speak of little else other than federalism. One more great thing about federalism is that if we restore it, we'll also see, I call federalism the vertical protection, because most of the power is down here with the states and the local governments. Only a few powers are up at the top through the federal government. There's also horizontal protection in the Constitution called separation of powers. As we've drifted away from federalism, we've also curtailed separation of powers. Bill Dawson and I and a few others were talking about this in our table. We've seen Congress over the last 8 years, just as Congress is pulling more and more power to Washington, D.C., Congress is also abdicating more and more of its power, delegating out to executive branch agencies the power to make and enforce law. President Trump has been a great champion in this area of recognizing that too many of our laws are made and enforced by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. And I applaud him for the fact that he's taken down 15 regulations for every new one that he's installed. As this has happened, Congress passes all kinds of laws that sound more or less like the following. Identify any problem that is of concern to the American people. Let's say clean air. It's appropriate for Congress in many instances to exercise federal power when it comes to things like clean air. After all, these involve interstate transactions. A power company, for instance, generates power, produces pollution, both the power and the pollution travel interstate. It's not only interstate, but it's also economic in nature. You get the idea that that's not something as to which a single state can always expect to be able to regulate within its powers within that state. But instead of actually dealing with the problem, Congress will outsource the solution. So we'll pass a law that sounds more or less like the following. We shall have clean air. That's basically what the federal law says. We shall have clean air, and we hereby delegate to the EPA the power to make and enforce laws defining what clean air is, prescribing limits on air pollution, prescribing penalties that will befall polluters who violate those limits, and then those same people who get to make those laws also get to enforce them. What could possibly go wrong? I'll give you an example that has been a problem in my state. When the EPA comes up with ozone limits that are, I kid you not, this will sound like an exaggeration, it isn't. EPA comes up with ozone limits that are below where Mother Nature herself has set them, such that it's impossible to comply at certain times of the year, no matter what we do. Even if human beings ceased to exist, we would still be in violation of some of those standards. When that happens, we get constituents from whatever part of the country is affected, and they come to us. And members of Congress tend to beat their chests and say, no, those barbarians at EPA, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write them a harshly worded letter. As if that were our job. Harsh letter writing. When in fact, our job is to make laws. It is itself not just something that can lead to tyranny, it is the very definition of tyranny when you fuse the power to make law with the power to enforce law. That's why our founding fathers put together 3 separate branches of government, so that each could play in its sphere. We've got one branch that makes the law, one that enforces the law, and one that interprets the law. So you see, these things are related. The vertical protection we call federalism, and the horizontal protection we call separation of powers, are connected. When we violate one, it brings about the violation of another, and it sets everything off course. But we as Republicans have the answer. We as Republicans take seriously our commitment. When those of us like Annie Harris and myself, when we're sworn into office, we take seriously and literally our oath that we're required to take under Article 6 of the Constitution, to uphold, protect, and defend that document. And that means not voting for things that exceed that power. Even if we know darn well the Supreme Court's not going to do anything to enforce those particular limits because it's chosen abdicating its responsibilities in those areas. The Constitution still matters. Most of the time, when we cast a vote on something, it's not necessarily something the Supreme Court has decided. And even if it has, it doesn't make us right for us to exercise power in that area. In closing, let me describe what this has created. It is no mystery, it's no accident, it's no mere coincidence that we've seen power taken away from the American people 2 steps. First, from the American people, power has moved to Washington. Then within Washington, it's been voluntarily relinquished by the people's elected lawmakers and handed over to unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. This 2-step power shift has occurred at the same time as, and as a causal moving factor, the consolidation of wealth and power in our nation's capital. It is no coincidence, for example, the fact that 6 of our nation's 10 wealthiest counties are currently suburbs of Washington, D.C. Don't get me wrong, it's a lovely area. But it's an area that manufactures nothing. It's not a banking hub, it's not a mining hub. There are no gold or silver or platinum or diamond mines here. No, the wealth is in Washington only because the power is in Washington, concentrated in the hands of a few elites. So this has been really good for a small handful of elites in and around our nation's capital, but it's been bad for everyone else, especially America's poor and middle class. Ultimately, the Constitution is an economic document, one that protects and respects the dignity of the individual human soul. It's been what has driven the development of the greatest middle class the world has ever known, and the greatest economy the world has ever known. We as a people believe deeply in these constitutional principles, even when we deviate from them. My friend Neil Maxwell once said, if India is the world's most religious nation, and Sweden is the world's least religious nation. America can be appropriately described as a nation of Indians governed by Swedes. We, in other words, in the United States of America, not just in a literally religious sense, but also when we analogize religiosity to constitutionalism, those governed by our system of laws still believe deeply in the Constitution. It's just a few people who run the government in Washington who don't. But they work for us. We as Republicans understand that. We can do better. We've been asked for years, decades even, to settle. To settle for the fact that this is the new normal, that we've got this overbearing, overreaching federal government. To settle for the fact that trillion-dollar deficits are the new norm. I'm here tonight to tell you, don't settle. Don't settle for trillion-dollar deficits. Expect balanced budgets. Don't settle for a Congress that wants to outsource its lawmaking authority. Expect your elected senators and representatives to do their job, to make laws. Don't settle for deviations from the Constitution. Expect constitutionally limited government. We can do this. We can do it. We can. We must. And together we will. Thank you very much.